Welcome back, America. We have with us the man I call America's wise man, Victor Davis Hanson, a great historian and philosopher, just a great person. And he's got a great podcast, Victor Davis Hanson, in his own words. So, Victor, the question I'm posing is, why is America great? What makes America and Americans great? Because I don't feel like, given the 250th anniversary of the Declaration coming up literally in days, that we're spending enough time talking about us. We hear the Islamists and the Marxists and the woke right just trashing the hell out of us and so forth and so on. But we are a great country and a great people. Why is that?
Well, we have very early on, we developed an ethos, a popular belief that we were going to have an equality of opportunity and class considerations wouldn't matter. It would be meritocratic. So we don't have titles marked like Sir or Baron, none of that. And when you see an American, you never ask him, do you own land? Or where were your parents born? Or what zip code? Some of us do, but that's not the American way. So we don't let class impede us, and that means it's an equal opportunity. And you can be born very poor and end up very middle class or very rich, or you can be very rich. And I know a lot of people who are very well off, whose children ended up very poor. So we're a very fluid society, very unlike both institutionally and practically like Europe. Every time I go to Europe, people say, what's your parents do? Where do you have land? They try to locate you in time and space without looking at you, the person. The other thing is, we developed an ethos about envy that's very different than most of the world. Americans were always told that there was a good envy, and that's emulation. You see somebody with a very nice car, a nice house, the American says, how did you get that? That's nice, I admire you. How do you finance it? In most of the parts of the world, they'll say, that's not fair, you shouldn't have that. And they want to destroy that, the bad envy. And then institutionally, Mark, this Constitution is very unusual, this tripartite system of judicial, executive, and legislative, and then reserving power to these states that's not enumerated in the Constitution. Federalism. Every time somebody creates a new democracy or we nation build, nobody can replicate it because it requires a lot of deep thought, and it ensures more or less a two-party system. So you don't have these fragmented parties that make these ad hoc coalitions, and then in time of duress, they can remove a prime minister without a vote of the public. The party gets in a back room. And any time that we approximate that, like we saw in 2024 when a candidate was removed by a backroom group, we vote against it. So our system ensures that at every step of the way, there's a check and a recheck on power, and the people have some say, either at the local, the state level, or the national level. And it's very hard to make a backroom candidate and just put him in power, as many of the parliamentary democracies do.
Wasn't that one of the core reasons for the revolution, the consent of the governed? The monarchy was imposing its will, including taxes, Stamp Act, all these other things. And the people kept talking about, and Thomas Paine talked about, and others talked about the consent of the governed. We want to say in this system. What you talked about our ethos, where does that come from? We talked to Newt about the Declaration of the Constitution. I want you to do the same if you're inspired to do so. But where do these ideas come from, and why were they successful in what would become the United States?
Well, the actual doctrinaire system of representative government, free speech, has a long trajectory from Greece and Rome through the European Renaissance and Enlightenment, the British and Scottish Enlightenment, and then the founders. But that was the formality of it. But when you look at contemporary observers in the 1830s, like Alexis de Tocqueville, he said it was very different in America because there was land and there was this idea that property and small farming, 95% of the original population were farmers. Jefferson he moderated his views later in life, but he said, I fear that one day we'll all be piled up in cities and we won't have this autonomous, independent, critical voice, which was the majority of the population. So there was land, and there was this idea that a man with 20, 40 acres would be independent, economically, socially, politically, culturally, nuclear family, and then he would be a skeptic of big government. And that was very important to the founders, this idea of consent of the governed, because Europe had a peasantry and a serf system in Eastern Europe and Russia, and they said they really felt that that type of population would not produce independent thinkers, and the rich would then collaborate with government with their power of wealth, and the poor would always be a rabble who would want free stuff from the government. But you had to have a middle independent autonomous class to avoid both those extremes, and that was found, at least in the early republic, from the agrarian idea of an independent farm family.
You know, relatively in the same time period, there was the French Revolution, and there was the American
Yes.
Revolution. And you have Edmund Burke, who's a member of Parliament with an Irish background, and he denounces the French Revolution, and he supports the American Revolution. When we come back, Victor Davis Hanson, what was it about the American Revolution that was so different from the French Revolution? I think that's very important. We'll pursue that in a moment. We'll be right back.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.